For many years, I've been a great admirer of Jeremy Ruston's work on the Tiddlywiki. And we'd never met. So I thought a nice way to meet would be to do a talk at a conference where we would have to collaborate. And
it's been really fun.
That's what we did. And I have to start with the obligatory question. So how many people in the audience know what Erlang is or Alexa have used anything like that? Right. So how many know what the Tiddlywiki is and have used that? And how many people know what Intertwingled is?
Ooh.
And how many people know what the intersection of Erlang, the Tiddlywiki, and Intertwingled is?
Right. You'll notice we didn't put our hands up there.
No, we don't know either. So this is the way to make a popular lecture. You take 3 niche subjects, and you take the Venn diagram where they intersect, and of course you will get a massive audience who wants to learn about this. So it's very strange that there's more than 1 person or 2 people in the audience, or 3 people. So the plan of this is to talk about intertwingledness and tell you what it is. And then, why do I want to do that? I want to avoid Groundhog Day. I'll explain what Groundhog Day is. And I want to talk about making complex things and the joy of all-in-oneness. All-in-oneness is a beautiful concept. And then the Tiddlywiki, we'll talk about the correct level of granularity and how everything is deeply intertwingled. And then we'll talk about some experiments we've been doing. So we'll start with Ted Nelson and a quote from his book, Computer-Lib Dream Machines. Everybody should read everything that Ted Nelson has ever written, and in particular, watch his YouTube videos. A Computer's Guide for Cynics. It's very good. So Ted Nelson coined the word hypertext, and he coined the word micropayments, and he coined the word intertwingled. And he said that everything is deeply intertwingled. There are no subjects. All there is knowledge, cross-connected in very complicated ways. And he said, hierarchical and sequential structures, especially popular since Gutenberg, are usually forced and artificial. Intertwingularity is not generally acknowledged. If we try and build things into hierarchies, they will always fail. And in fact, we get like a bird's nest soup of links, which actually represents reality. So how can we represent things? So the central problem that I have been trying to solve for the last 30 or 40 years is how to organize ideas and software. That's the central problem. How can you find stuff? And Jeremy's been working on the same stuff for many years. So that's really good. Anybody know who this is? It's the movie Groundhog Day. So unfortunately, we follow the software model of Groundhog Day development. We invent something simple. We add more features. We add more features and more features and more features and more features. And it gets so complicated that nobody can use it. And so we throw it away and start again. And that is the dominant model of software development that we use. So in fact, software is a form of Buddhism, where we go through a cycle of suffering, a cycle of life, death, and rebirth without a beginning or end. So can we do anything about that? Right. So we've built all this complicated stuff, and we get to the end of our cycle, and we want to rewrite it. But then that's difficult, because we don't want to throw away the good stuff that we've got in that process. So how can we reuse that stuff without making it more complicated? Well, we could throw it all away and start again. But you miss the good stuff if you do that. You could stick it in a container and use a defined interface, Docker and things like that. Oh, that's great. But one day, that will become very complicated. So you'll have to put the container in the container. And one day, that will become more complicated. And you'll put that in the container. So one day, an operating system will be very, very big. One day, a program like Keynote will be 140 megabytes. And you wonder, how was it that an operating system was less than 1 megabyte or less than 640 kilobytes a mere 20 years ago? What went wrong? Or we could add a messaging interface between complex things. And this is how we work. We have complex models in our brain and we talk to each other. We don't understand how our models work, and that doesn't worry. So we get to communicating sequential complex things. This is like CSP with no maths and no algebra. And we add mailboxes to complex things, and we add protocols. I now want to talk about all-in-oneness. So all-in-oneness is the property of a program where all the code and all the data is in a single container. If you have programs and data, then circumstances will happen where the two move and they don't know about each other. So, for example, Keynote is a well-known program that I've actually used to do this talk with. And it consists of two things. It consists of a program that Apple have produced and a data file that's got the talk in. And these two things should always work together. So when we were preparing this talk, Jeremy and I were mailing backwards and forward a Keynote file. And so Jeremy had Keynote version N and mailed me a file called talk.keynote by email. I had started off with N-1, and he emailed it to me, and I got... But Jeremy had updated his version of Keynote without me knowing.
Without permission?
Without permission. And this very strange thing, time to update. To open this presentation, you need the latest version of Keynote. Not now. And I couldn't read.
Those slides are lost, aren't they?
Those slides are lost. We could never read them again, actually. Go to App Store. Now, the very funny thing happens is, if you go to the App Store, yes, you can upgrade the version of Keynote. But wait a moment. You also have to update the version of the operating system as well. Now, upgrading an operating system is a very dangerous operation because at least 5% of all the programs I have won't work anymore if I update the operating system. So I'm very reluctant to do this. I don't want to do this. The property of all-in-oneness was where you combine the data and the program so that they can never be isolated from each other. Right. So it's actually the opposite of using dependencies. It's very slow and difficult to write. It increases your understanding. But it increases the ability of that program to work in the future. So I've got I think they're later in the slides. A couple of examples is the Smalltalk image. In the book on intertwingledness, Alan Kay writes a chapter about discovering an early pile of disks. And he plugs in a disk, and he finds a Smalltalk from, I think, 1968. Puts it in his machine, and there we are back in 1968. This program works exactly as in 1968 because the Smalltalk image and the assumptions it makes about the operating system are such that we can still run that. And that's the same as Jeremy's Tiddlywiki. Tiddlywiki, which Jeremy will talk a lot about and show you, combines the program, which is in JavaScript, and all the data. And so we can run all the early versions exactly as they were, how many years ago?
15 years ago now.
Yeah. So there are 5 steps to all-in-oneness. Oh, well, this is...
Yeah, this is a great example.
Let's. Okay, so none of you have ever done this. Let's do a simple programming problem. We're going to write a program that displays a nice button in the browser. Now, how difficult can that be? Right. Link, rel equals style sheet, stack, bootstrap, something, stack, bootstrap, min, button class, btn, danger button there. And you get a nice... Has anybody done? No, I would never do that. Would you do that? Would you include 200 kilobytes of cascading style sheets that are compressed to get a single button that's nice? Has anybody done that? Yeah. Is it good? Do you have a bad conscience about this? Right. And we haven't put any JavaScript in yet. Goodness, no. I mean, this is just a button. Hey, suppose you want the button from one cascading star sheet thing and you want the form from another one. Oh, dear. You know, that's why you're up in a megabyte before you've done anything. Right. So it's not future-proof. Wait a moment. The CDN will break. In 10 years' time or in 1,000 years' time, there won't be a CDN and your program will stop working. So here's this amazing, you haven't changed your program, but somebody else has changed something and it's broken. It's not future-proof. It's 141 kilobytes of CSS. It won't work offline. What's the advantage? Fast time to market. That's the only advantage. Right. I'd never do that. Right. It's a security nightmare. I mean, it's horrible. Why is my web page? Better see. Oh, come on, it's daft. So what can you do? Make a local copy of the CDN. Yeah. It's not future-proof, because if you sort of mail your HTML program to somebody, you forget to mail the local cache copy, it'll break. Or if in the future you rearrange your file system, it'll break. Not good. Then you can work offline. You can do it on the plane on the way over, because you don't need the CDN to be online. Right. You could move all the CSS into the HTML file. Now it's actually all in one. So that is future-proof. You can move the files, and you won't break anything, but it's huge and horrible. That's not really elegant. So you can cut and paste the stuff from the download into your program. Yeah. Have you actually broken the copyright at this stage? Yeah, maybe. So maybe you've got to put the copy. Have you broken any patents or something? Might be a bit worried about that. Okay, it's actually very future-proof. You can understand it. It's small. But you might have broken somebody's copyright. So we better rewrite it and extract the essential goodness. Do I really want WebKit user select none? And I don't know. I've noticed if you remove all these WebKit things and just put the thing, it all works anyway. So I've never really. Do you understand the difference?
I do. It stops you being able to select the text on the button, which is annoying if you do that by accident.
So then you rename things. And you think, well, this is now a derived work, so you're probably free of any copyright problems. Perhaps you should put, I would like to, my sincere thanks to Bootstrap for coming up with this brilliant idea. Right. So do you really want n megabytes of incomprehensible stuff in your application in order to use 0.00001% of the code? Oh, well, doing that, we can forget about build systems because we're not using dependencies. And we can forget about Webpack and Grunt and I have no idea what these things are, but apparently you need Grunt files and things to make these work. I don't know what they are. I do understand JavaScript and things like that. So we get this idea of all-in-oneness. We put everything into one. And here's Smalltalk and Tiddlywiki. So here's the Tiddlywiki. Tiddlywiki, it's small-grain knowledge. The whole idea is to make small bits of knowledge that are reusable. If you think about it, characters, the letters of the alphabet, are very reusable.
Oh, that's nice.
The characters A, B, C, D, we reuse them all the time. But the granularity of what we reuse is useless. Big PDF files are not reusable. The unit of reusability is probably about a single paragraph or two paragraphs where we don't change the subject. So basically, we want to construct things out of one or two paragraphs where we do not change subject. And that gives us the granularity of something that we can reuse. Right. So I've played with the Tiddlywiki for many years, and off and on. And I was playing with it recently, when we started this. And I had my Alleluia moment, the road to Damascus, where you are struck by enlightenment. And it was, I was going to write a to-do list in the Tiddlywiki. And I was just doing it like you always write a to-do list. I made a single page. And I made a single tiddler called to do. What else would you call it? And I put the things in that you want to do. You want to water the cats, feed the plants, and buy some milk. And suddenly, this is a flash of lightning hit me. You can't reuse this stuff. Well, you could say, here's a list of to-dos. But suddenly the eureka moment came, and I said, why don't I make 3 tiddlers? One called Water the Cats, another called Feed the Plants or something. Oh, here we are, Water
Milk.
the Cats, buy the milk. I haven't got the third one. And then the to-do list becomes a transclusion with some logic in, almost like Prolog or something like that. The to-do list says list links with the tag to do. It's like a find all. Just find all everything that's got this tag and make me a page out of it. Now I've got something that's reusable. These are reusable. They can be included in different things. This is the simplest form. I've got a single tag here, to do. I could add another tag, done, and then I could list all to do but not done, and do things like that. So I can compose things. So now we have Jeremy. So what's Jeremy? Jeremy is the human garbage collector.
I wondered what that meant as well.
Well, because this process I showed you of taking 200 kilobytes of CSS and finding the essential stuff that does it and pulling it out, and cutting it into his thing, that's the human garbage collector's job. And it's incredibly difficult. It takes an incredibly long time, and the results are incredible. So Jeremy's made these tiddlywikis. They've evolved over time, and we can look at them and we can see how they behave. So we're going to look at that for a bit. And I'll hand over to Jeremy.
Gosh, which one do I press? The right-hand one?
You press that one, yes.
That one. Thank you very much, Joe. And I'd just like to add to what Joe was saying about dependencies. Something I often find is developers will nod wisely to the kind of remarks we've been saying and say, yes, you should really try and reduce the number of dependencies. But I think what we're really getting at is that if you reduce the number of dependencies to 0, something completely different happens, and a whole load of concerns that you have, even with a single dependency, vanish, and that frees you up in a way that is maybe counterintuitive, because so much of what we do is these tools that are themselves intertwingled. So, yeah, it's a big deal, and I'm pleased that Joe has recognized it. So Tiddlywiki started by accident, and you can tell that because I gave it a ludicrous name, which is so ludicrous it actually actively quite annoys some people. So to begin with, it was called Twiddlywiki, and I was interested in this micro-content, this idea of making a wiki that instead of being for full pages, instead of a wiki for Word documents, a wiki for little items of content. And it was triggered by seeing Gmail. So Gmail in 2004, it's kind of new to see emails threaded together. And it was amazing, because previous crappy web-based email, you would control-click to open multiple emails in multiple tabs. Or similarly, if you've ever refactored a media wiki or something, a canonical refactoring in a wiki is to take a page and split it into 2 or join 2 pages together. And in media wiki, you have to open those 2 pages in different tabs and then sort of juggle between them. So Tiddlywiki was trying to take a new look at that and thrown together a few hundred lines of JavaScript, HTML, and CSS. And this is that very first version, 200 lines. So this is a primordial tiddler, the idea of a fragment of text that has a title, it's got some metadata, in this case it was me, and some text, and the text has links in it. And if I click on a link, then it retrieves the subject in the link. So you can see as I click on links, I'm kind of unfolding my own version of this story made out of fragments that take my interest by following the links. And that was all that it was at this stage. And now, if we go back to Keynote, more opportunities for technology to go wrong. You might say, what's so wonderful about wikis? And I've discovered that, obviously, most people think of the distinguishing features of wikis being the fact that anybody can edit them. And that, obviously, is the kind of surprising thing that's emerged from Wikipedia and so on. But to me, the interesting thing was always that they made linking be part of the punctuation of writing. And this is where our shared interest in Ted Nelson comes in, that Ted Nelson's, well, I shouldn't put words in other people's mouths. I believe that hypertext and links between text is the closest we've got to abstracting the way that links and connections in our brains happen. And I can't help but see how my brain works as being a series of blobs of stuff with links between them, that intertwingledness stuff.
And you should explain that these links are bidirectional, not one-directional.
Oh, yes, and of course, our hypertext people, we take it for granted that the web is a kind of crippled hypertext system, and it lacks some of the characteristics that we think are super important. So things like being resilient to link breakages, and bidirectional links. So I had a funny experience. I released that little, well, in fact, the next version that you'll see, a slightly improved version of that onto the internet, and in 2004 it went viral in the old sort of world of blogs and Delicious and things like that. And that was lovely, but it was also deeply frustrating because people would write about it and say, this is really nice and interesting, but it doesn't work. And it'll be great when Jeremy fixes it. And what they meant was that I'd written it as a single HTML file because I was interested in exploring the user interface idea, and I wasn't really interested in making it practical at that point. So I put a button, a save button in it, and if you can see this, so you edit some tiddlers in here, and then when you press the save button, this window pops up with the source code that you have just edited that you can then copy and paste and save somewhere. So it's kind of, I used that technique to edit Tiddlywiki itself to create the documentation. But then a fantastic testament to why we should all share our stuff, I put this out there and was, well, the first thing that happened was really obvious. A bunch of people wrote server-sides for it. And I saw some value in the way that server-side communities are quite tribal. You know, Ruby people are Ruby people, and Python people are Python people. But if you write something that's pure client-side, then you can have a multiplicity of server-sides, and you can keep everybody happy by giving them a server-side in which they are productive. And Tiddlywiki is, you know, the common thread there. But the weird thing was that somebody made a Firefox extension that let it save directly to the file system using some APIs that I wasn't aware of for accessing the file system from Firefox extensions. And then we discovered that the same damn APIs actually work in a normal web page if it was loaded on a file URI. So this is very, forgive all this web development prehistory. But what all of this meant was that this absurd little demo suddenly turned into something practical that could be used. And it turned out that its properties, which are slightly different than most software, enabled it to be used in an unexpected and different way. So Groundhog-wise, I carried on making it better. So took my embarrassing joke and tried my hardest to turn it into, you know, what I could see in my head that it could be. And that culminated in BT buying my one-man company 10 years ago in order to sort of assimilate some open sourceness in the organization. So after, we'll talk a bit more about Tiddlywiki. There's a lot to be said about it, but I wanted to kind of pull back to what we've learned from it, which was the introductory slide there we had. So Tiddlywiki's philosophy is now kind of clear to me. It didn't have a philosophy at the originally because it was kind of a joke. But I think these are useful takeaways. It's only worth recording information if you're going to reuse it. Really obvious. I mean, sometimes it is therapeutic to write stuff that you're never going to read. You know, write a letter to your enemy, put it under your pillow, burn it in the morning. That's a lovely thing to do. But if you do want to reuse information, there's, as Joe said earlier, what we've learned from Tiddlywiki is you cut it up ruthlessly into the smallest semantic unit. So everything we thought we knew about making PDFs and making Word documents is all about, you know, filling up a big blank vessel, whereas writing effectively in Tiddlywiki is trying to find a way to split things up into these chunks so that you can reassemble them into other forms. So there's a few more words there. I think Joe was attracted by this single file thing, and it does indeed have some bizarre consequences. When Tiddlywiki was very young, somebody emailed me to say that they were going through a divorce. They had a child of 2, and they were writing all their tangled thoughts about their divorce in a Tiddlywiki. And then they went on to talk about how they looked forward to sharing that with their child when the child was grown up. And I was blown away by how he'd implicitly realized that the software would still work in 16 years. And in fact, now it's clear HTML5 has been something of a success, and I think this stuff will still work on my grandchildren's telephones, quite possibly in a little emulator box. It also has a different sense of self-containedness that Smalltalk also has, that Tiddlywiki is written in itself. So the entire user interface of Tiddlywiki, which is all stuff you're used to, tabs and buttons and things, is all constructed out of Wikitext primitives. And so what that means is anybody who's using Tiddlywiki can recreate something as complicated and rich as Tiddlywiki. And in the process, it's a quine. It's a curiosity of computer science. For years has been these programs that print out their own source code. And as one of those little corners of computer science, if you go digging, you'll find people who've made quines that look like things as well. Really remarkable. But as far as I know, Tiddlywiki is the only thing that actually relies on being a quine in order to do its job. Because when you make a change and save it, it recreates its new source code and saves it for you. So there's some stuff about how that all feels inside, but what it really comes down to is this meta problem. Faced with the task of building a notebook, don't build a notebook, build a tool that lets you build notebooks. And it's that kind of natural pull to the meta and to the general that I think software people all have. So I did eventually do exactly as Joe predicted. After 6 or 7 years, I was hideously embarrassed by this sort of old code, threw it all away and rewrote it. And in fact, it was a great experience. And I'm lucky that both the old product and the new product, they both have kind of active communities and they're both kind of surviving. So it's more like punk rock. I mean, punk rock didn't actually kill rock and roll. Rock and roll carried on even after punk rock came in. And that's what Tiddlywiki looks like today. I'll show you a slide at the end with some links and you can dig around. But I wanted to just briefly talk about the unexpected effects of this, because from a computer science perspective, what you see is a piece of software that looks like it does something you're very familiar with. It looks like MediaWiki, but it's got this perversity of being written in a completely different way, and it doesn't work like the software that you're used to. But it turns out that's had a profound impact on the way it's used. That probably, I don't know, who knows Bash here? Who has ever typed anything in a terminal? So we're all freaks, because obviously most people, not only have they never done that, but they're also terrified by it to an extent that's not logical. And people will go to quite extraordinary lengths to avoid what they see as these scary, complicated tasks where they might accidentally break their computer. So in fact, giving somebody the ability to make stuff without needing all of that machinery is tremendously empowering. And some of the things that our complicated build environments with lots of files and Git and so on, we get, as developers, some amazing capabilities. Like, I can rewind time. I can randomly code, and then if it doesn't work, I can rewind. But if I was a recruitment consultant, and I was trying to experiment with a different way of arranging my LinkedIn profile, you don't get that same ability to jump back. And that's true for what most of ordinary computer users experience. But give them a single file Tiddlywiki, and they can basically make their own Git, because if I save a copy of that file and put it over there, I know in my own knowledge that it's safe. I can work on this file and restore the two of them. And surprisingly, computers are much faster than you think. And so you'd think an HTML file in the browser would be a barely practical proposition, but I work with 100 megabyte Tiddlywikis all the time. And thanks to, for years now, a ridiculous amount of engineering effort has been directed towards browser performance. And so in fact, if you're interested in a VM to run on, the browser is the most widely available, best optimized one of all. So here's an example, which I think I've got time to show you in person? Yes, very quickly. So I like this because this is kind of about business models. So here's an American volleyball teacher who has used Tiddlywiki to build a system to help them teach volleyball. And it's kind of, I love it because it's kind of crazy in some ways. Why are all those things different colors up there? And why are these things different colors? Why does Joe's laptop scroll the wrong way? But the thing that's really cool is that they made it themselves. So this is somebody who is a PE teacher and not, as far as I know, a software developer. And they were able to construct their own system. And their only alternative was to go and find a software developer, explain to them what they wanted, and get them to build it for them. But as we know, to explain what you want, or to decide what you want, is actually equivalent to building the thing in the first place. And so under that route, he would have been condemned to build the software twice. Whereas this way, using kind of cargo cult techniques, where you copy and paste code from other people, change it, oh, it didn't work, jump back to the previous version, he was able to make this complete system. And to me, the incredible thing about that is that computers have an astonishing power in our world, but that power is reserved for the people who know how to use them, or the people who can gain funding to build things like Instagram. But you can't really imagine a model where VC money goes into high school volleyball teaching. And yet, high school volleyball teaching benefits from software as much as anything else. So my proposition there is that by making software that works differently, you can get into different places than software normally does. And I think our job as technologists is to furnish technology for other people. So we've got like 10 minutes, Joe. I'm really sorry to have limited you. But now we're going to talk about all the fun stuff. We've been coding together for the last 3 months.
Yes.
It's been awesome.
So how do we people have built these wonderful Tiddlywikis. How do we combine them into a big global Tiddlywiki? How do we make it sort of planetary scale, right? It's individual scale. It's like, a Tiddlywiki is like your brain or my brain. So what do we do about that? So we did some experiments. So how can we reuse the content? And how can we avoid Groundhog Day? Right, so one of the things I want to do is provenance. I should say that a lot of these Tiddlywiki, Hypertext, these are the ideas of Ted Nelson. And Ted Nelson was very much into provenance. Where did stuff come from? There's a fundamental fault with editors. Wait a minute, provenance, yes. Definition. The place of origin or earliest known history of something. If you're in an editor, imagine you're editing a program in Emacs, and you're doing some research, and you've got a browser up, and you Google a bit, and you find something that's useful, and you cut and paste it from the browser, and then you paste it into Emacs, and you save it. And you've destroyed the information as to where it came from. And then you publish a file, and you post it into a forum, and it gets indexed, and somebody takes that content, and they cut and paste something into another document. When we're programming, we can often spend hours and hours and hours of doing research. The result is a program. And we publish the program, and we throw away all the research. So after the event, we can't see where everything's come from. So one of the ideas we wanted to put into the Tiddlywiki and things was provenance. Where has everything come from? And can we record it accurately? What I'm trying to do is implement some of the things in Xanadu, which Ted Nelson thought about and wrote down the ideas of in, golly, when? Do you know when? I don't know.
He
Long
came
time
out with
ago.
Hypertext the year I was born, 1965.
Right. So we don't know where stuff in a file comes from, and there's a fault with editors. So if anybody wants to write a decent editor that accurately tracks where everything comes from, what did you know at the time when you were doing something? Maybe the idea came right out of my head. Maybe it didn't. What had you been reading before you wrote the text? So where does content come from? So we want to attribute things. We need to maintain intellectual property rights. Everything. How could you do this? Well, we could put them into blockchains. Not the silly blockchains that use lots of energy, but just write-append files.
Which we love.
When things talk to each other, we're not going to put all the text in a search horse. We want to tag it up in some sense. Tags, as you saw, were to-do tags and things like that are very useful. So thinking about experiments with tagging, how do we tag things? So far, we've done a couple of experiments. People tag things. If I write a bit of text, I might tag it with Erlang and functional programming or something like that. And then when I'm searching, I would think, I want to find something about Erlang and so I put. But would the tags that you use be the tags that I use? Well, there's no guarantee of that. So we did a couple of experiments with Bayesian inference. So since a lot of tiddlers are tagged, we could work out the conditional probabilities of, given a tag, we've got these words in the document, so just do Bayesian inference on them. In the first pass we learn, in the second pass we retag and see how accurately we can predict the tags. And the answer is, yeah, it totally works. If I predict 4 tags per tiddler, I was getting like 85% hit rates on them, so it's not so bad. Pretty good. The trouble is, those tags were probably chosen for transclusion purposes. So they might say a tag to do. Somebody's put a tag on, it says to do, because they want to transclude it into a to-do list. But the real information is milk and cats, buy the milk. Buying the milk might be the thing. If I search for a tag, maybe I should tag it with milk, not to do. So in fact, although the tagging Bayesian inference was pretty good, didn't think the tags that were generated were much good. Then I tried TF-IDF, term frequency times inverse document frequency. This is just about the simplest tagging mechanism you can think of. It's widely used everywhere. It's really quick to implement. The tags that it predicted for the wiki were much worse. It didn't predict the human tags. But when I was looking, I thought the tags were much better. And also because it's a statistical aggregate over the entire thing. Maybe it's got a better chance that when you search for something, you will use the same tags. So I sent you that stuff with the tags in.
Yes, it did.
And I think they're quite nice tags.
I think one of the things that's really nice about it is it makes you reconsider what you wrote. And in writing, like coding, you need to refactor. And in order to refactor, you need to acquire a new perspective to see how to do it.
So one thing is not quite working. We'd hope to get it working by now. Is Jeremy's adding some new buttons and side panels to the Tiddlywiki. And the idea is, as you're composing a wiki, in the sidebar, the tags will be just updating as you program. Sorry, as you write the wiki, as you write the text, there'll be a suggestion bar saying, I think the tags in this should be.
Of course, we've got a nice, solid mailbox where we can send messages to an Erlang process, get stuff back into the Tiddly world. Took us longer than we thought.
Yeah. And so we get communicating Tiddlywikis. So we need to put a bolt on a front end. And then I thought, I'd actually like this idea of communicating things. When I worked for Ericsson, we built a system, actually, for trouble reports. What happened was that customers would... Well, I didn't. Sorry, when I say we, I don't mean me. I mean Ericsson collectively, not including me. But, well, you know what I mean. So the front office got trouble reports, and their job was to forward the trouble report to the back office who would solve the problem. And so somebody would say, well, this doesn't work. Well, it's a problem with the antenna or the power subsystem. They would forward it off in the back end. And we did, well, not we, research did some experiments there where they used Bayesian inference, looking at the old results to see if they could predict who to send the mails to. It worked very well, actually. It was as good as the human front office. Occasionally it was sent to the back office, and it was wrong, and they sent it then back to a human who would reclassify it. So I thought, maybe we could do something like this with communicating Tiddlywikis, that... Oh, wait a moment. I'll talk about this more. that we could view a Tiddlywiki as a front office with a Bayesian inference thing or a thing that would forward it to a tiddler. And we would add mailboxes to the Tiddlywiki and mailboxes to the tiddler so they could send messages to each other. Because I think in this way we can get out of this Groundhog Day. We can reuse old things by sending messages.
I think that...
And the messaging model just says, you've got a mailbox. You know the name of the thing. You send in a mailbox. I want to know about X, Y, Z. And it will sort of send you some answer back. So if you want to say, I know about X, Y, Z, you need an ontology that defines the meaning of words. And the ontology is the tagging. So we need to understand the meaning of words, and we need to define an ontology. And that's what we're trying to do. The other thing is, we could put them all into some huge namespace, but I don't think that's going to work. We thought it would work to start with, but it's just too big.
Joe started trying to collect every Tiddlywiki you could find.
Yeah, I'm trying to collect every tiddler in the universe. But the trouble is, with that, the individual tiddlers do not have copyright and reuse indicators in. So I've learned that you can't reuse, there have been legal actions where people have been sued by quoting a tweet. And although the probability of this happening is very low, if I were to reuse somebody's Tiddlywiki without explicit attribution that I can reuse the content. So we need to change the tiddler system to make it permissive for legal reasons. We don't do that at the moment. And then we need mechanisms for tiddler discovery and tiddler similarity. Once we've made a tiddler this unit of reusable information, can we find the most similar tiddler in the planet? Because what we want to do is reduce entropy. We're increasing entropy all the time by writing more and more software. What we need to do is to reduce entropy by discovering that two things are similar and collapsing it into a smaller space to make it more understandable. So we're trying to address these problems. And we have some ongoing experiments. Adding an Erlang-like mailbox model for communicating Tiddlywikis, analyzing all known Tiddlywikis, and doing tag inference. And a thing that's struck me recently is what I call focus of attention. That when you're writing something, you suddenly think of something else. And you want to sort of do that and then go back. And when you're writing something on screen, I want an assistant that's in the side, not, sort of giving me additional, helping me write, giving me additional information. As it is at the moment, you're in one window like that, and you want something, search over there, it's in the, I've lost where I came from. I can't remember how I got there. I want this seamless way of providing me with information. So
we've both had the experience where we've done the same piece of work twice because we'd forgotten about doing it the first time. So that leads to the dream of being nudged.
And what I'm also trying to do is do a sort of clean room Tiddlywiki that's got the essential features of. So I'm building my own. It's Groundhog Day over and over again. With Jeremy's
Groundhog's all the way down.
With Jeremy's help and encouragement. So here I am hacking a load of JavaScript and having great fun. And then we'll put an Erlang-like messaging model onto it. Because the thing is, in Erlang, we know how to connect planetary scale messaging. That's easy, you've done that. But now that we've got planetary scale communication, what do we use it for? Well, trying to combine these little citadels of knowledge. So that's it. And how long have I got? 0 minutes. Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Can I just put up a resources slide for you?
Oh, no. I didn't have one.
No, I put it on the web, and then you just never saw it. But if you want to see what we were doing, germline.com/intertwingled.
No,
we'll tell you that we don't have an internet connection, but you will have an internet connection, so that's all right.
Do you have time for questions?
I'm afraid not. It's strict 0.
Oh, dear.
Many thanks, Jeremy and Joe.
Okay, well, questions.
We'll be outside if anybody wants to. Thank you, Joe. Thank you very much, Joe, for inviting